Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone.
Salam po. Good evening.
Salam po.
How's everyone this week? Okay.
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 Is next week our semester break?
Yes.
It is. Okay. I wasn't sure actually. I hadn't looked at the calendar in a while, but it hit me the other day that I think next week is semester break. So I'm sure you guys are looking forward to semester break next week. Get away from your
No idea.
get away from your screens for a little while. Okay, so let's just wait a couple minutes, make sure everyone's back online. Let's see if Mahfouz is here.
I'm here.
Hi, Mahfouz. You're presenting today, right?
Yes.
With who? Who's your partner?
Christina and Miao Tian. Yeah,
Oh,
Li Jiao Yan. She's already here.
Yeah, it's me. It's me. I'm already here.
Hi. All right. Okay, just another couple minutes. Okay, well, we can get started, I guess. All right, so good evening, everyone. So welcome to week 7. Semester's flying by. Can't believe we're at the halfway point already. So tonight we will continue our discussion on youth and society by looking at youth policy. So we'll be shifting a little bit. Last week we covered developmental relationships as a model of looking at how young people develop in society. Okay, and so this week we'll be shifting to a very different topic, youth policy. The reading tonight is from a book chapter, actually. It's actually a report chapter and it's from the European perspective. But it does a very nice job, I think, of giving a good outline of what a strong youth policy looks like and what it contains. And I think it's a good tool to use to assess youth policies. And since Malaysia has a youth policy, as I'm sure you all know, the Malaysian youth policy, we're actually going to use that, the reading, as a sort of framework for looking at the Malaysian youth policy, a bit of a critical look at the Malaysian youth policy. All right, so that's what we'll be doing tonight, inshallah. And then next week you have your break. We all have our break next week, so we'll be back in 2 weeks. So let me start just by opening up. Are there any questions, concerns, anything anybody wants to share or anything before we start? No? Anything from last week? No? Everyone's good?
No, doctor.
Okay. All right, so I will go ahead and let me open up my... Okay, so tonight's agenda, first we will, I just first want to say a few words about these different in-class activities and small assignments that I've included a few, like the McFarland, the small McFarland assignment that I gave you guys. So I'll be doing that throughout the semester. And early in the semester, I gave you the sort of rundown of the assessment for the course. And you may have noticed that I didn't include those small assignments in there. So the way I treat the small assignments in class are I use them to your benefit. In other words, later when I'm doing the grading, the marking, I'll use those assignments to hopefully help you. For example, say you're in between 2 marks or something, I will look at your in-class assignments, and I'll use those as sort of bonus points for later. So I use them for your benefit, for your advantage. Okay, just so you know that. So they do count. They will count in your grading, but they're not the three the 3 major assignments. Okay, but they do count and they will be used. Okay, so just so you're aware of that. Think of them as sort of like a sort of minor insurance policy or something like that. Okay, so later. But I will not include them as formal assessment, the 3 formal assessments. All right, so I just wanted to make that clear so you're aware. Okay, so tonight we will have as usual, have our reading presentation by our presenters this week on youth policy. And then, as usual, as time permits, we will do we'll have an in-class activity. And tonight, what I'm going to do is I'd like for us to use the reading presentation, the chapter on youth policy, to look at the Malaysian youth policy critically. Okay, and so I'm going to break you up into small groups, and then I'm going to let you read through the executive summary of the Malaysian youth policy, which is also up on Putra Blast, as you may have noticed. It's not very long. The executive summary is not very long. The full policy is quite long, but the executive summary is only about 25 pages. And so what you can do is, in your small groups, you can break up the policy in like sections of 3. So you can have like 3 sections, and then each of you can answer the following questions. So your group, there's like, as you can see here, I've given you these questions for critiquing the policy. All right, and what you can do is you can sort of break these up into 3. So each of you can take 3 or 4 of these questions and then answer them. All right, and you can post your answers on Padlet as usual. I've set one up there, and then if time allows, we'll have some of the groups present their responses, their critiques of the policy. Okay. All right, so is that clear?
Yes. Okay, Prof.
Okay, all right. Can you guys hold on a sec? I have to ask my son to stop drumming. It's a bit loud over here. Hang on one sec, yeah? Okay, sorry about that. One of those work from home things. Okay, so Mahfouz, you ready? You and your group?
Yes, ready. Ready, think so. Is
Okay.
then ready?
All right, so
Yes, I will share screen now.
sure, you can. I believe that I have allowed you to share screen, so go ahead.
Wait. Can you see my screen clearly now?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
This is the first one, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you have.
Hello. Good evening, for guys, and we are topic is for the reading how to develop a national young pellicles. And I'm Peng Miaotian, and my friend Li Xiaoyun and Mahajin Mohammed. The next one. So the first part is introduction for the young pellicle. We can see the timeline. We have 5 timeline. The first one is 1997. Management has been established to assist young policy in European countries. And the second is 1999. Established part for the South East Europe. And the second is 2001. Rahman was the first country to launch a national young edition part in 2001. And the next also is the 2001. In December 2001, new dynamic for young in Europe. The last one is 2009. The international young political mass. How to develop national youth strategies. And the second, I think it is the second
Peng,
one.
Sorry, can I
Past
interrupt?
this one.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Sorry?
Rose, did you, which chapter are you presenting, or which part of the reading are you presenting? Are you presenting on what is a national youth policy?
Yes.
I presenting of introduction, but this part is
Okay.
not for.
All right.
We combine the first one, just introduction.
You're presenting the
Combine.
introduction first. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry. Just want to clarify.
but this part is not for my part. I think it's next.
Okay.
Next, not is my part.
Okay.
Oh yeah, this one. So the second is NF3 for the government on young issues. The first is there is no natural source anywhere for young people in Europe. And the second is childhood young policies was implemented. The second is young policies in many European countries as the young people between the age 15 and 25. The next one. So it's the clearly different tiger group. The first is there is intra-service also for the young people in Europe. The second is some countries young policies has so-called lower and up the age. And the third is the age is 15 and 25. The next one.
Okay. Can you go back, Ping? You're going a little too fast.
Okay.
If you go back. Okay. So go back one more slide. Okay. So this manual, this youth policy manual, is focusing on how to develop a national youth policy. Okay, so
yeah,
what it does is the chapter outlines what are the necessary requirements of a strong, effective national youth policy. All right, and so what the author does is he breaks this process down into several components, right?
yeah.
So
it's develop a coherent and composition of course, circle study, and there should be have the full-time organization in charge, and the national background is higher than the likely world species, and also have the national development needs to perceive the circuitry for the young. So this is this part.
Okay. So the authority of the government on youth issues. Okay, so youth policy requires many sectors to be involved. All right, it's a cross-sectoral type of policy. All right, that's really important because, like, for example, what you're going to see in the Malaysian youth policy later is the fact that there is a call for many different ministries in Malaysia to come together and embrace the national youth policy. So the national youth policy is supposed to cut across all government sectors and ministries that deal with young people. So for example, you have the Ministry of Health runs certain youth programs. The Ministry of Agriculture runs certain youth programs, right? Ministry of Youth and Sports, obviously. Ministry of Education obviously runs many youth programs. So they are all these different ministries are meant or supposed to adopt the national youth policy content into their own policies, right? So it's supposed to be a policy that cuts across different government sectors. Okay, now to do that though, you need one particular government coordinating body to make sure that everybody is actually implementing the policy, right? So here, what they're saying is that the importance of having an authority, some sort of authority to do that, right? And so some sort of coordinating body that can ensure that the policy is being implemented across sectors, right? And so that's very important. There are many countries that don't have that, right? So for example, the United States, my own country, does not have any kind of national level youth policy. So everything that's related to youth policy is done at more of a local or state level. But even the states don't even have their own youth policies per se. All right. So I don't know about maybe countries like China. Does China have a national youth policy?
Yeah, China has the policies.
A national youth policy.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Because we have the policies is about too many things. Is about like, for example, is we have the 9 years, you need to go to the school and you don't need to pay the too much. You need only to pay for the book.
Okay, that's part of the national youth policy.
Yeah, and we have if you didn't has 18, yeah, you cannot work like this.
You cannot work until you're 18.
Yeah, before you're 18.
You cannot work.
Yes, because you are the child. You didn't. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So 18 is the official age of the official working age. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So you can go to the next slide now. Just go to the next slide. I just want to make sure we cover all these. So this is important too. So one of the first points he gives after defining what is the government authority in charge of the policy is he talks about having a clearly defined target group. So when you say you have a youth policy, who is youth? Who is meant to be included in that definition? All right. So if you're going to have a youth policy, then you have to have a very clearly defined target group. Okay.
Okay.
So the thing.
Okay,
now,
I think the book is about the book reading, right? The book is also only have the airport. So
what book are you talking about?
I mean, is the book is only has the airport young policies.
Oh, this paper is from the European perspective, yes. But this first chapter is a general it's a general discussion on youth policy development. And so it doesn't,
Mhm.
he's talking from the European perspective, but he's giving a general kind of overview of what are the components, or what is the content of a good quality youth policy. So that's what we're talking about today. So we're learning from the European experience, because many of the countries in Europe have well-established youth policies. Okay, but this is a general discussion about youth policy. Okay, so the first thing he says, there's no universal answer for young people. Even within Europe, in the countries in Europe, they define youth differently. Just like in Malaysia, it's 15 to 30. Some countries it's 15 to 25. Whatever it is, he says it's very important that it's not so much the age, but that there is a clearly defined target group in the policy. You need that. Otherwise, it's very hard to make a policy about a group that's not well defined. Okay, so you need to define who these young people are. All right, so you identify the lower limit, the lower age limit. In Malaysia, it's 15, and the upper age limit, which is 30.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's really important. So who is your target group? And then within that, even what we're going to see, like from the Malaysian youth policy later, there are additional ways of defining target groups. So for example, at-risk youth, right? OKU youth, unemployed youth, youth in university, youth in secondary school. All right, so there's different sort of target groups within that larger youth category. So the youth policy tries to address the needs of all those different target groups. All right, that's an important aspect of the policy.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Okay, Peng, so please continue to the next slide.
Okay. The next one.
Yeah.
This is a continual and dependent security. The start should from unit clear mass sure to achieve, and the goals for the young people. The need is a terracing part and policy. They have the long term goals and the magnitudes, and have the short and the minutiae.
Okay.
This is the part of this. And also have the scale, the bronchate, and the necessary and the purpose.
Okay. All right.
This is about
so the next one he talks about is concrete and transparent strategy. All right. So it's very important that the policy articulates a clear strategy, right, for addressing youth needs. All right. So that means very concrete goals and objectives, right? And ideally, the policy should include not only short-term goals, but also medium and long-term goals as well. All right. And then policies are typically reviewed every, say, 5 years or so. They'll review the policy and then they'll make amendments to it depending on what happens. Like, for example, now we have COVID-19, right? So that requires a review of all the policies, because things are going to dramatically change. So for example, like especially for young people now who are severely affected by COVID-19, there has to be a review of the policies to make sure that the policy is still relevant to what's happening in the lives of young people. And then because of COVID-19, we may have new needs that need to be addressed, right? So for example, now with the young youth and employment, for example, they're going to have to do massive policy shifts to help young people get jobs and assistance with education and all those things. Okay, so but the strategy has to be based on youth needs. It has to be based on concrete and measurable goals and objectives. It should be transparent. Okay, transparency is very important, right? So they can clearly see what is the plan for youth in the country. Okay, and so all this is a critical component of a national youth policy.
Yeah. It's I think for now you say have the COVID-19, and I think the most important is increase.
Is what? Sorry.
It's Increase.
I didn't understand you. Could you say it again? The most important part is what? Increase.
Hello?
Uh-huh.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I didn't understand. I did not understand what you said just now. The most important
No,
part is
I cannot hear you now, but hello?
yes. Can you hear us? Hello, hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Hello? Have we lost her? Can you hear us, Ping?
Yeah, yeah, wait. Uh,
Okay, so
Hello?
just to okay, so anyway, can you hear us, Ping? So Mutiara shared this. This is interesting. Indonesia does not have an integrated national youth policy. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. The only law that specifically aims to empower youth is law number 40, 2009, which is taken by the government as the reference when discussing youth. Mutiara, do you know anything about that law? What does it include? What kind of youth-related content is in that law? Can you share?
It's in Indonesian. I'm trying to explain it in English.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's just one
Layanan?
law. It's not an actual policy.
Yeah. No, it's just one law. That's it, and it constitutes like 5 subcontexts.
I see.
It's all about youth, services, youth,
Oh, youth services.
responsibilities. Yeah, and all. It's only 5.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first Malaysian youth policy, which was first constructed in the 80s, was a bit like that. It was a very simple policy, very brief, and then it was revised back in 2015 to the one we have now. But yeah, so there's also many countries also have what's called a Youth Act, which is a law. And so a policy, it's important to understand that a policy is not bound by law. A policy is just a sort of guideline, right, on how things should be done. But it doesn't have what they call legal teeth. What's the word? It doesn't have the ability to enforce what's in the policy, okay, until it becomes an act. So once it becomes an act and it's an actual law, then those things that are within that act have to be passed. I mean, they have to be carried out. And if they're not carried out, there can be penalties, right? So when a policy like this becomes supported by an act, a youth act, then it becomes much more of a force in supporting youth, because then all the things that are put in there have to be carried out, and if they're not, there will be ramifications, legal ramifications. But a policy, unfortunately, is only a guide, so it's a way of getting things moving in that direction, and it helps other stakeholders and service providers to identify, okay, which direction should we go in, how should we design our programs, what kind of outcomes should we be focusing on, etc. But it doesn't really enforce any of that, okay? And so that's why people tend to push for the act as well as the policy. All right, so the fact that Indonesia started with the law is really interesting. So, because a law is a law, I mean, it's enforceable. Okay, so that's quite interesting. Okay, so I think we've lost Peng. She said that she has a bad connection. So Mahfouz, do you want to take over here, or how do you want to do it?
Doctor, maybe I can continue because I
Okay,
think
go
Pearl
ahead.
has already finished her part.
Okay, sure. Great.
Okay. Okay, let me continue to introduce the youth policy, knowledge-based policy. Youth policy must be based not on the perceived needs of young people, but on real-life needs that can be documented through research. A knowledge-based policy comprises 2 dimensions of knowledge, research or scientific knowledge, and practical or experimental knowledge. Both both of them are equally important to the development of policy. Any government planning to develop a national policy, national youth strategy will need to first collect relevant updated research on young people or initiate such research in cases where the existing material is insufficient. It is not only about which measures to use, but also when to implement them and how. Applying relevant research will help us figure out the correct answers to these questions. Without accurate baseline data, which only comprehensive field research can provide, it will not be possible to measure the real impacts of the policy. And
Yeah, this is a very important part of the process. So anytime you have a policy, you must have research that goes along with it. So research not only to develop the policy, but research also to implement as well as evaluate the policy. And the idea, people tend to think that knowledge-based outcomes or policy work is only from the sort of academic scientific perspective, but it's actually not. It's a combination of both. There's the academic scientific knowledge or type of research, but there's also the practical and experiential knowledge. So really good policy development incorporates both, right? So you have the, sort of university-based researchers like us, or the research institute officers that work in government. Ideally, they will partner with the practitioners, the youth practitioners, whether they're youth workers or they're youth program heads or whatever. So the two must come together. You must have both. You must have research, academic, as well as practice representation in the policy development process. These two are really important. And so there's often criticism, and what I've heard in Malaysia is that there's often criticism in the sense that they don't frequently incorporate the practical or the practice-based knowledge element enough. They rely too much on us university people, right? And they say, oh, you're just university people, you sit in your ivory tower, you don't really know what's going on in the field and all that. So that is partially true. So to make up for that, ideally, you would bring both of these together, both of these groups together, both the practitioners as well as the researchers. When you have that, then you have both perspectives, and it can be a much more effective policy, right? And even in terms of policy evaluation, like right now, UPM is in charge of both evaluating as well as developing the new Selangor State youth policy. So Selangor State has its own youth policy, right? And so our team is now in the process of revising the current policy. And to do that, we have to undertake research, right? And so the first thing we'll do is we'll go to the field and we will talk to practitioners, and we'll find out, what are the issues, what's going on in the field, what are the needs of youth, right? So we talk to youth stakeholders, youth practitioners, and we get all these sort of perspectives, right? All the different perspectives to find out really what's happening in the field. And then from there, we will assess the effectiveness of the current policy, and then look at ways to improve the policy to develop the new policy. All right. And so it's a very tedious process. It's a lot of work that goes into it, especially when it's done correctly, when it's done well. Right. So it is really a knowledge-based policy. You cannot just come up with policies out of thin air. They have to be based on something that's concrete, that's relevant, and that really speaks to the needs of young people, because that's what the policies are all about. And it's the practitioners that are going to be the ones that are going to follow and use the policy later. So if it's a policy that's not relevant to really what's going on in the field, they're not going to use it, right? They're not going to make use of it, and that's a shame. Okay. So knowledge-based policy. Okay. Any questions? Any questions so far? Any comments? Anyone want to ask or share? No, nothing? Okay. I guess there's no questions. So
I will continue.
yes, please.
Okay. Through an evidence-based approach, we can know which mirrors work in terms of policy that aims to bring young people into the labor market. And we can know how to work with young offenders in order to help them become fully appreciated citizens in society. And it is essential for the monitoring and the evaluation process.
Yeah, so this is in the chapter. They give some examples. For example, to know if there's issues like how to bring young people into the labor market. So, for example, now with COVID-19, we have this crisis of employment, youth employment, right? So we need to know what's effective. You know, what strategies out there are actually working. And the only way to really get at that is to do this kind of evidence-based approach, which is based on research. You know, so you need the research to inform what are the most effective strategies that can be put into the policy, right? There's really no way to do that except through research, right? And they just give some examples here, how to work with young offenders, like young people who have committed crimes and so forth, and how to, if we want to integrate them back into society, right? So how to do it? Well, we need research. We need research to explain, to show us what is effective, what works, and what doesn't work. Otherwise, if you don't have that, you're going to have a very ineffective policy, and no one's going to use it because they know it's not relevant and they know it's not effective. Okay. So this kind of monitoring and evaluation must go hand in hand with the policy that you're developing. Monitoring and evaluation is really critical to having an effective youth policy. Okay. All right.
The access to research evidence, maintaining regular contact with relevant research communities, and encouraging and supporting research on young people is a responsibility of the government body in charge of youth. Such contents can be maintained through regular meetings where ministry staff and officials are briefed on recent developments and ongoing research on young people, or through seminars or conferences, bring together both the research community, government representatives, and the non-government youth sector.
Yeah, this is really important part. This is a very important point. And I think in Malaysia, we need to be better at doing this. Having regular contact and regular ongoing cooperation between research community, government representatives, the NGO and youth sectors. Okay, there's this sort of working group or working groups that meet regularly on monitoring the policy and then improving the policy, implementing the policy, etc. Unfortunately, what tends to often happen is they develop a policy, and they come with a very nice policy on paper, looks very nice, sounds very good, and then that's it. Really, nothing else happens after that, and they just expect people to use it, right? But there's no real attempt to translate the policy for people in the field on how to use it, and then to monitor whether people are using it, if they're using it, what's working, what's not working, how can it be improved, etc. So policy implementation is as important, if not more important than the policy itself. Okay, and so you need those different voices in the process. You need, the government. You need the government people because they're in charge of the process. You need the academic research community. You need the NGO community, the practitioners, the implementers, and so forth. All of these perspectives are critical to making a policy successful. All right, and so I think we haven't fully really learned that lesson yet. I think we're getting there. It's improving, but from what I can see and through my experience in doing it, we're not fully there yet. It's still sort of half-baked, if you will. But inshallah, we get there. Okay, Xiaoyan?
Yeah, okay. There is an example about a knowledge-based policy in Sweden. Collecting and analyzing and disseminating knowledge of young people's living conditions is fundamental to Swedish youth policy. Today's system started with the 2004 Youth Policy Bill. The bill stated that young people's living conditions should be followed up regularly using indicators within all relevant policy areas. The current monitoring system is based on youth policy indicators, an annual report on young people's living conditions, and the periodic attitude and value studies. These elements form the main sources for Swedish evidence-based youth policy. And this model was presented in 2004 with only minor changes in the 2014 Youth Policy Bill.
Okay, so the example here is to show that there is, in some countries that are much more systematic, they have this sort of regular monitoring system using certain policy indicators. What are policy indicators? Can anybody tell me? Do you know what that refers to? Anyone want to take a guess? What are policy indicators?
Maybe some research.
Okay, yeah, it does definitely require research. Specifically, for example, let's take housing here, the example of housing. What would be policy indicators related to housing?
The implementation
Of what, Mahfouz?
of the policy itself.
Okay, so what might be
Whether-
some of the indicators to determine whether the policy is being implemented? So if you're a researcher and you're being tasked and you're being tasked with trying to determine whether the policy is being implemented, what kind of things will you look for?
Data.
Yeah, what kind of data? Especially if you're talking about housing, because housing in the Swedish youth policy, housing is part of the youth policy because housing in that country is an issue for young people. So maybe in the policy they have a section on housing and they have certain initiatives in that policy. So if you're being tasked with monitoring that policy, what are some of the indicators you might be looking at? Can you take a guess? These are called
Data
policy
that have
indicators.
the house.
Sorry?
Okay. Just now you said that about the policy of the youth for having new house, right?
Yeah,
So the
housing. Yeah.
indicate, yeah. So the indicator that shows that the achievement of the policy is that how many are the number of the youth that having the housing,
Yeah.
and that the achievement actually.
Sure. So it could be like home ownership, for example. So maybe part of the policy is, 50% of young people between 18 and 30 will own a house within 5 years, right? And so then your job as the researcher is to go out and actually to measure that. So one of the indicators could be percentage of young people who have purchased houses or have some kind of home ownership scheme or something. So that would be one policy indicator. So that's why the policy has to have sort of concrete goals. Then it's easier for the researchers or the monitors to go in and determine whether the policy is successful, right? If the policy has very sort of general, unclear goals, it just says, we want more young people to have better housing. Okay, that sounds good, but how are you actually going to know whether the policy is successful? You need to have concrete objectives and goals, and then you have to be able to have indicators to measure those goals to determine whether the policy has been successful, right? So a good policy will have those kind of concrete goals. So within 5 years, 50% of young people will own homes, for example. Okay, that's a very concrete goal, right? Maybe housing, the rate of homelessness will decrease over the next 5 years by 50%. Okay, something like that, right? It's much easier to measure something like that. So that kind of a policy and that kind of a monitoring system makes a policy much more effective and easier to determine whether it's being implemented and being successful. All right. And so what we're going to see with the Malaysian youth policy is there's some, I think, I won't say it. I'll let you, because that's part of your activity later. So I won't ruin it for you. Okay. Anyway. Okay. Xiaoyan, any questions about that? Anyone have any questions? No? All right. So please continue.
Yeah. That's a cooperation between policymaking and research in Sweden. The Swedish Agency for Youth and the Civil Society is responsible for conducting the studies included in the monitoring system. The studies are to be based on official statistics, youth surveys, dialogue with young people and young youth organizations, qualitative studies, and current research.
Do you guys know the name of the Malaysian government has a research institute that's responsible for doing research on youth development? Are you familiar with this organization? Anyone? Have you heard of the institute called IRIS? Yes, Fatin, yes, IRIS. Institute for Youth Development. It's in English, it's Institute for Youth Development Research. And there's a Malay name for it as well, of course. But that is the official research institute under the Malaysian government for studying youth development. Okay, so yes, so thank you for posting that. Oh, that's Mutiara's question about Indonesian law. We'll get to that. We'll get back to that in a minute. So IRIS is the organization within the government that's responsible for doing all this kind of research. So you see there in the slide, the Swedish government has their own agency for studying youth in terms of monitoring their policy implementation. What's very ironic about IRIS, IRIS does a lot of youth research in Malaysia, and they do some very interesting studies, but IRIS does not do direct monitoring of the Malaysian youth policy, which is kind of strange, I think. Okay, and this is just my own sort of critique of IRIS, and not to say they don't do good work. They do very good research, but for some reason the sort of mission of IRIS is not directly to monitor the implementation of the Malaysian youth policy, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why the Malaysian youth policy often has some difficulties with implementation. And in fact, UPM, our group at UPM, Dr. Murshid, Prof. Ismi, myself, Dr. Siti Rabaa, our youth team, we did a series of workshops for youth and sports officers in Malaysia on the Malaysian youth policy. Our job was to train them on the implementation of the policy. And we were really shocked to see the very low level of literacy about the Malaysian youth policy. Okay, so even in the Ministry of Youth and Sports, at the highest level of youth program implementation, they were not that familiar with the Malaysian youth policy. All right, that is a big problem when it comes to policy implementation. That means that your policy is not only not effective, but it's not even understood. Okay, and that is a big problem. So ideally, an institution like IRIS would be involved in this kind of ongoing monitoring of the policy to make sure that the policy is being implemented, and then, determining whether it's been effective or not. And then they could make changes to it. They could call for, we need training in this, or we need training in that, or these people need training on this part of the policy. And, they could identify the needs of the different stakeholders, right? So that's the importance of having this research unit in terms of policy development and policy implementation. Okay. So Malaysia has it. We have it. We have IRIS, have the policy, but again, the coordination, the implementation, it's not really doing what it's supposed to be doing, unfortunately. Okay, so that's just important to know. It's important to understand. Okay, so anyway, let's just look here on the chat box. Mutiara answered the question about the Indonesian law. And it says here, contains regulations regarding all aspects of youth services related to coordination and partnerships, infrastructure, facilities, and youth organizations. In addition, it also contains regulations regarding community participation in youth services, awarding funding and access to capital for youth entrepreneurship activities in a planned, integrated, targeted, and sustainable manner. Okay, interesting. So I'm assuming, Mutiara, that there's much more to all that in the law itself. This is just a description, an overview of the law.
Yes, correct, Doctor. It's actually there are a lot of, as I mentioned before, subcontext underneath. So I'm just like summarize it.
I see. And in Indonesia, do you have a ministry of youth?
I think we do have. I'm not sure. I'll just check on it.
Oh, okay. So you're learning about your country.
Yeah. Yes. Now I'm like curious. I'm just searching.
That's good.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. Okay, so we can go back to presentation, our group presentation.
Okay. The government commissioned in 2010 the Swedish Agency for Public Management to evaluate the national youth policy monitoring system. According to the final report, the Swedish Agency for Public Management found certain needs to develop the system, as it was not supplying enough relevant knowledge and analysis, especially not to meet the needs of local governments. The 2014 Youth Policy Bill therefore presented a proposal for developing the monitoring system, addressing the parts where the evaluation had identified shortcomings. A concrete action was to more systematically include municipal level statistics in the presentation of youth policy indicators.
Okay, so this is an example of the importance of evaluation, the importance of doing policy evaluation, right? So identifying shortcomings, right, and then making recommendations on how to improve the practice. Okay.
Yeah. And this is the development of Sweden's youth portal. In 2014, the Swedish Agency for Youth and Civil Society was commissioned by the government to develop a web portal for showing statistics on young people's living conditions. On both national and local level, the web portal should, according to the government task, build on and develop the indicator system of that time. In 2015, the web portal for youth policy indicators DCE was developed and made public. Today, 12 government agencies and the Swedish Sports Confederation are responsible for providing statistics. The indicators are grouped under the 6 themes, which are education and learning, physical and mental health, economic and social vulnerability, influence and representation, work and housing, culture and leisure. That's all of the Sweden's youth policy.
Okay, so youth policy indicators according to these 6 groups or 6 themes. Okay, so you can see there: education and learning, physical and mental health, economic and social vulnerability, influence and representation, work and housing, and culture and leisure. So that's interesting that education and learning is part of the youth policy indicators, because often in most countries there's an education ministry that deals specifically with education and learning. And here they have it in their youth policy. So it'd be very interesting to see how the youth and the education sectors work together. So this is often, in most countries, there's often a clash between the youth and education sectors in a country. Like in Malaysia, we have our Ministry of Education and Higher Education, as well as Youth and Sports. And so anything dealing with schools or universities is under the requisite ministries, okay? But anything outside of the schools is the jurisdiction of Ministry of Youth and Sports. However, there's sometimes you have these clashes when it comes to things like co-curricular programs in schools run by NGOs, because the NGOs are more or less under Youth and Sports, but they're working in schools, right? So you have these sort of territorial issues, and often it gets very messy. And in fact, I know from the fact that in Malaysia, it's been an issue in the past of how to get these 2 sectors to work together, actually, because there's certain jurisdiction issues and what we call in English turf issues. Like, that's my turf. You can't work there, and that kind of thing. So it gets kind of political even sometimes. So this is not only Malaysia. A lot of countries have this same dynamic between youth and education. Okay, so that's interesting. So there are 6 main indicators. Okay, and they're all providing data, as you can see. They're all providing statistics. Okay. Okay.
Okay, and the next part is young people as a resource, not a problem. Perceiving young people as a resource or as a problem is in fact an important dichotomy in the perception of youth policy. And what is important to suggest is a constant need to move the focus away from problem-oriented approach towards seeing young people as a resource that can contribute actively to the society.
Okay, so now we get into how young people are viewed in the context of the policy, right? So yeah. So youth as a resource, of course, sounds like what? What have we discussed the past couple of weeks? From our topics the last couple of weeks, what does that sound like? Youth as a resource refers to what? What is it called? That perspective about of youth, of working with youth, called Yep, for youth thriving. All right. So also known as PYD. Does that sound familiar? What does PYD stand for? No one remembers? Uh-oh. Yes, thank you, Zila. Positive youth development, yes. Okay, so this is this is really taking a positive developmental approach to youth. So yeah, a youth policy should really situate and position young people as resources, not problems. Okay. In the past, though, many youth policies were very much problem-oriented. You know, they focused on how to control young people, how to treat young people, how to make sure young people are not causing problems, how to make sure young people are not on the streets, not stealing from people, you know, et cetera, et cetera. That was kind of the old way of viewing young people. Now, though, we see in many countries there's a movement more towards looking at young people as a resource. Okay, now that's not to say that young people don't get into problems and difficulties, and they do, right? And we even have things like juvenile justice, where we have to have, there are young people that commit crimes and so forth. And so that often has to be in the youth policy. How do you deal with young people from those, you know, who do get involved in those kind of behaviors and activities? But generally speaking, you most of the policies we want to come from that sort of resource, young people as resource perspective. All right. And so the idea is that a youth policy should ensure active participation in young people in society in healthy ways, right? How do we get the most out of young people? How do we help them to reach their full potential and realize their potential? All right. How do we ensure that all young people have a pathway in society, a pathway to success and to healthy adulthood, right? That's the idea of the policy. Okay, so all young people have something to contribute in society. We just have to find the right support for them and the right pathway for them. And you know, a policy that really works at doing that is the kind of effective policy that looks at young people as a resource, right? As a resource, right? So the different ways that the governments through the policy can provide opportunities for young people, right? Okay, and in the article itself, it's interesting. They talk about in different parts of Europe, youth policies they tend to differ in this regard. Like some have a very much problem-oriented approach still, because historically that's just where they're coming from, and others have become more resource-focused. So that's just kind of interesting. I think what you'll find about the Malaysian youth policy is that it's very, very much based on perceiving young people as resources, which is good. I mean, I think it's good. You know, but again, I mean, it's not to say that having a policy that also talks about the problems that young people face and how to deal with those problems is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, of course, it's a necessary aspect of a policy actually, so that it has to be there. It has to be there to some degree as well. All right. Okay.
Okay. And traditionally, a problem-oriented perspective has dominated the government's approach to youth policy. Through such a perspective, young people are either vulnerable and in danger and need to be protected through government policies, or they are troublemakers. They are conceived of as either potential victims of their upbringing and conditions, or as victims and potential perpetrators because of their personal traits and character. Consequently, youth policy targets specific segments of the young youth population with very limited or no coordination between different sectors. Taking the perspective of seeing young people as a resource in society, as valuable citizens in their own right and the capacity as young people, the natural focus of a young policy is to ensure the active participation of all young people in society and to implore and find ways that empower them to realize their full potential as citizens. It also supports young people in living life appropriate to their age group and encouraging their independence and critical thinking.
Yeah.
Such a policy targets all young people and aims at having an integrated cross-sectoral governmental approach towards them and their needs and challenges. Through this perspective, the role of government is to provide packages of opportunity for young people. Eastern European and the Southern Eastern European countries have particular challenges in this regard, as their historical political heritage is one of strong governmental control of the young populations and a rather problem-oriented approach to youth policy. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Eastern European countries are former Soviet, or it used to be under the Soviet Union. So of course they're going to be very centralized and control-based in their way. So they're sort of historic. There's a historical element to that, and they're, I guess, sort of transitioning out of that. But there's still, you can still see the remnants of that in their policies. It's quite interesting. Okay, so just to show the difference, the contrast between the problem-oriented perspective and the resource-oriented perspective. Okay, it's very important. All right. The other thing about a youth policy is, again, trying to position young people as adults, as people who are transitioning into adulthood, and to giving young people those opportunities and rights as adults. That's another important part of the youth policy. You know, is to sort of do away with this idea that young people, that youth are still children or anything like that, and to give them and to ensure within society that they have those sort of adult kind of rights, and that they're treated more like adults than children. Okay, that's an important part of it as well. Okay.
Okay, and this is an example about youth as a resource in the current situation, COVID-19. COVID-19 affects all segments of the population, with young people playing a key role in the management of this outbreak and the recovery following the outbreak. In these circumstances, it is important to ensure that youth are heard alongside other communities and patient voices in the rollout of health and non-health interventions in response to COVID-19. The role of governments as well as young youth organizations and community groups will be essential to ensure that trustworthy public health information is disseminated. Young people themselves are also utilizing online technologies to spread public health information in engaging ways, such as videos to promote effective hand washing or explain how social distancing can save lives.
Okay, very good. Yep. So, yeah. So COVID-19 again presents a lot of challenges to many different policies, not just in youth policies, but yeah, we will see. We shall see what's going to come of this, and how it's going to affect policymaking. You know, again, COVID-19 is not a lot we can say because it's still happening. We're living it, right? So it's not over yet, and there's really no way to know about the long-term impacts and so forth. So it really creates a lot of problems for policymakers. Right. Okay.
Okay, and then young innovators are already responding to the virus through social impact innovation around the world. A number of initiatives are being developed to leverage young people's efforts to generate and deliver support to at-risk population or populations affected by the pandemic. Whilst most of these initiatives are on a voluntary basis, they can also take the shape of social enterprises. Many youth-driven technology innovation hubs are supporting startups to develop effective solutions to address COVID-19. For example, CC Hub in Nigeria is offering to provide financial, research, and design support for projects related to COVID-19.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That's yeah. I like. Thank you for adding that to the discussion. That's very good. Yeah. I mean, this again. This is not. These are innovations that are happening in the society that are not part of any kind of policy. But the question becomes then, do they become part of a future policy? You know, these kinds of things, especially if they are proven to be successful. You know, do they become integrated into a youth policy in the future? And that's why it's really important that people are documenting what they're doing and whether they're successful and so forth. You know, so yeah, we're going to see a lot of this kind of activity. Okay.
Okay. And the next part is promoting youth participation. In line with the argument that a youth policy needs to perceive young people as a resource, it should include provisions for how young people on a continuous basis will be involved in both developing the youth policy and implementing it. Non-governmental youth organizations should play an important role in any youth participation model or mechanism and should have strong recognition and the support from the government. As civil society organizations, they involve a lot of young people. Therefore, they have a democratic right to be heard on issues that are of concern to young people. Yeah.
Okay, so the NGO sector plays a critical role, not only in providing services for young people, and participatory experiences for young people, like for example, youth associations. They give young people opportunities to take on leadership roles and organizing and so forth. But they play a very important role in the implementation and development of policy. So even in the context of the Malaysian youth policy, the NGO sector played a critical role. Groups like the Malaysian Youth Council and all their affiliates played a very important role in the development of the youth policy. All right, so yeah, the NGO sector is critical to youth policy development, youth policy monitoring, and everything. All right, so it has to be recognized very clearly in the policy. Because the government relies very much on the third sector, what's called the third sector, or the NGO sector, to promote youth development in the country. All right, and then also the a lot of policies they work very hard, or they have a very clear agenda of trying to get more young people involved in organized activities and work. Right. So how do we go about encouraging young people to join youth associations, for example? That can be part of a policy, right? A youth policy. Okay, so civil society or the NGO sector, the third sector, whatever you want to call it, yeah, plays a very important role in terms of youth participation, both in policy development as well as policy implementation. Okay.
Okay. And most countries in Europe have a national youth council,
Right.
which is an umbrella organization for the
Yep.
non-governmental youth organizations in the country. These councils should play a privileged role as a government partner in the development of youth policy. Involving non-governmental youth organizations in youth policy development and implementation has indeed become a strong European standard and is expected to take place at any level of government.
Yeah, so Malaysia really follows the UK model, the European model in this sense. We have our MBM, Majlis Malay Malaysia, the Malaysian Youth Council, which is the same thing as you see in the slide here. It's an umbrella organization of the affiliate organizations. And so the Malaysian Youth Council plays a critical role in anything related to youth in the country. And they work very closely with the government on developing policy and so forth. So that's a very important organization.
Yeah. And the expectations for youth policy should give clear recognition of the non-governmental youth sector and include measures that encourage more young people to become involved in non-governmental youth organizations as a way of fostering citizenship and taking active responsibilities for shaping the society. However, there are also many young people who are not members of youth organizations, and a government youth policy should also give them opportunities to be consulted on issues that have an impact on them, in particularly at important stages of redirecting a country's approach to youth policy, such as when the government is developing a new national youth strategy. In such cases, the government should organize comprehensive open consultations with young people, typically at the local level. Throughout the country, such consultations can be organized with the assistance of local government through the school system or together with non-governmental youth organizations.
Yeah, this is a very important process. Anytime they want to revise a policy or develop a new policy, they need to have representation from young people from all over the country. So, for example, in the context of our the work we're doing with the Selangor State Youth Policy, we have to do sessions with youth from different backgrounds throughout the state, and we have to have engagement sessions to get feedback from them about what are issues of concern, what their needs are, right? What they think about, what should be in a youth policy, etc. So there's this process of engagement with youth, and I mean that's critical. That's a critical part of any effective policy. Is you must have buy-in, and you must have participation from the the people, the stakeholders of the policy, right? So in this case, it's youth, but also not just youth, also youth organization leaders, as well as others as well, parents, schools, etc. So there's a wide variety of stakeholders that are called on for feedback and for input, right? And so that's a very important part of the process.
Yes. And the next is an example about promoting young people to policy making. Youth empowerment synergy. Yes, Ghana. To advocate for and improve the national youth policy. This project will take advantage of the upcoming review to strengthen leadership structures in youth organizations, increase youth participation in the political space, and galvanize broad-based youth research for input into policy formulation. This will be achieved by expanding the membership and building the capacity of youth organizations to engage with politicians at local and national levels. It is expected that the project will lead to the improved articulation of youth issues, perspectives, and policy recommendations by the Ghanaian youth, and empower young women and men by giving them the platform to speak, be heard, and engage. The 2010 National Youth Policy of Ghana acknowledges the needs for policies that empower young people to effectively participate in the national development agenda. This is an opportunity for young people to play a greater role in the policies review and the implementation. And this project's partners is Youth Empowerment Synergy and the Voices of Youth.
Okay, thank you for sharing that example of Ghana. Okay, so this is a youth participation strategy to provide more input directly from young people into the development of the national youth policy in Ghana. Okay, so this is a really, you see this in a lot of countries. Again, it's to give youth voice, right? To give the youth voice in the process, to make sure that the policies are relevant to their needs. And unfortunately, this doesn't really happen enough. So for example, like Malaysia, do you know Malaysia has a youth parliament? Did you all know that? The Malaysian Youth Parliament. Were you aware that Malaysia has a youth parliament?
Yes.
Okay. So Roshakina, what does the youth parliament do? Do you know?
Actually, youth parliament has organized by the Ministry of Higher Education, if I'm not mistaken. And they gathered all the youth to participate in the parliament and debate on the certain issues. That's all.
Okay, so yeah, they don't. They're actually not involved in parliament, but they have their own parliament, and then whatever resolutions they come up with are brought to the regular parliament, right? So it's sort of like it's like a minor parliament or something. But it's sort of socializing youth leaders into the parliamentary process and giving them some input into policymaking. Okay, and this is another example of how these sort of youth structures are used to give young people voice in policymaking in countries. So a lot of countries have these sort of youth parliaments, right? And they work differently. Some countries, they're directly linked to the main parliament. Some, like in Malaysia, they have a sort of their own parliament, and then those issues are brought for discussion at the parliamentary level and stuff like that. So this is just one example. So a lot of countries have that. It's a really important part of the problem. Again, this is providing youth with those more adult sort of roles in society, right? And we learned very early on in the course, remember, about how how youth, the idea of youth came about as an extension of childhood, as a result of secondary schooling and all that, if you remember from our earlier lectures, right? And so this is a way of trying to re-engage youth as adults in society, right? And to give them those sort of adult roles that they are perfectly capable of having, okay? And so it's quite interesting to see how they work. In fact, there was an issue I don't know if you guys saw the news today in Malaysia, in the real parliament, there was an issue regarding YB Said Sadiq. He was, there was a controversial situation in parliament where one of the older members of parliament referred to him as Buddha in the parliament. And it was they really took offense to it. It was sort of like a put down, right? Because he's so young, you know. So you see this ageism, this kind of thing where, you know, they still see him as a, you know, he's in his 20s, right? He's quite young, so they still see him as a kid, as a child, and all that. You know, so this goes on. Even though he's a parliamentarian, he was a former cabinet member, you know, he still faces this kind of discrimination, right? So, you know, that's the reality in society. So. Okay, I think it's time for our break. So let's take a break now. We'll take our Margaret break. Okay, and then
Okay.
we'll continue after. Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's take our 20-minute rest, and we'll see you guys back here in a few minutes.
Okay.
All right.
Do I need to stop sharing?
I don't think so. I think we can just leave it. We just leave it as it is and see if it works.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Are we back? Looks like we're back. So your slides are still there, Xiaoyan, so you can
Yeah.
you can go ahead and continue.
Okay. Okay. The next
Fun.
is across.
Oh, sorry. I thought my yeah, sorry.
Mahfouz is so eager, he can't wait. Okay. That's the kind of semangat we want in our class. Okay, alhamdulillah.
Okay, the next is a cross-sectoral integrated approach to youth policy. Governments have a wide range of responsibilities that should be addressed in a national youth policy. In every European country, education is considered to be a major policy sector. Health and employment are equally strong policy areas for any government. What is particularly significant for youth policy is that it should include a concurrent and integrated strategy for how a government will view these different policy sectors in relation to each other. There are many policy areas that are seen as belonging to different sectors, but will nevertheless have a strong impact on each other and should therefore be coordinated. For example, the level and the quality of education has a direct impact on whether or not young people will get a decent job after graduation, and may also affect young people's awareness of health-related issues.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, by its very nature, a youth policy is going to have to cut across different sectors, and we sort of spoke about this a little bit earlier in the class. Okay, so even education, non-formal education, vocational training, you know, health, housing, it's you know, anything that really impacts young people is related to the youth policy, of course. But then these are also jurisdictions of other policy areas, other ministries, and so forth. You know, so this is where the coordination of the policy is really important. Okay, so that's important to know.
The next is different areas of youth policy. There is a range of different areas that are important components of youth policy, which creates cross-traditional policy sectors. The relationship between education, employment, and health is just one. Another example is the comprehensive issue of lifelong learning, which comprises formal education, non-formal learning, and vocational skills. We do know that involvement in youth organizations or working as a volunteer tutor or youth leader in a youth club provides a young person with valuable life skills that cannot be taught through the formal education system. And another example is that young people's opportunities to participate in sports and otherwise have a rich and quality free time. For example, through participating in non-governmental youth organizations is known to have an impact on the number of young people who turn to illegal drugs or alcohol, or who may even become offenders.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and
Yeah, pretty self-explanatory, yeah.
And the next is integrated policy. The need to find ways of coordinating policies in different sectors leads us to speak of youth policy as a cross-sectoral policy. By an integrated policy, we mean that a government's actions and measures in these different areas must be coordinated into one comprehensive strategy addressing youth. Also, the responsibilities for implementing the different parts of the strategy will remain in the relevant ministries or government bodies.
Yeah, so it has to be an integrated policy, and it's a real challenge. I think there's, at one point, I forget under which government in Malaysia, but at one point, I think there were 10 or 12 ministries identified that all have youth programs under their purview, their respective purviews. So imagine having to, coordinate, across 12 different ministries, the implementation of the policy to make sure that all 12 of those ministries, their youth programs are sort of directed and guided and formulated according to the youth policies, the Malaysian, the national youth policy. It's a very big undertaking. It's a very big task. So it's a real challenge.
Okay, I think that's all of my part. Then I will pass to my friend to continue.
Okay, thank you, Jayan.
Okay.
Thank you, Zayan, for your presentation. So next, I'll present about establishing concrete mechanism for interministerial cooperation youth affairs. Ed, this one is, can you back one slide, Zayan? Next. Is it missing? Wait,
Take your time, no problem.
This one is your slides?
Never mind, I share my screen.
Okay. So I need to stop sharing, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, right. Next is interministerial cooperation. Okay. What unique about youth policy is differs from other public policies, which touch upon many policy areas. For example, they have education, they have health, integrated. Therefore, for most of the country, when they make a youth policy, they will the ministry will be involved is health, employment, education, and culture. Most of the country. So for successful interministerial cooperation, it's difficult because first it's hard to develop a strong ownership because most of the ministry don't want to take the ownership for the same strategy across different, because the different policy, although they can make one good policy, however each of the ministry want to take as their own.
Yeah.
So they have no one solid policy.
Mm.
That one, the first one. The second one is different working cultures, because different ministry have different minister, so they have different work ethic. And the third one is they have a competing interest. So if the simple example that can we show is when you see in our ministry itself, different ministry want to show their own KPI, their own ability, their capability, even in the ministry itself. So because of that, it's difficult to make a good, solid policy for youth. However, many European countries have youth policies which include mechanism for ensuring good interministerial cooperation. So in Europe, as what discussed by the writer, he said that in European, they have good youth policy, which maybe we can share after this slide. So ensuring a well-functioning interministerial cooperation during the national youth policy strategy, youth strategy development process is as important as during the policy implementation stage. Okay, this one, how to establish a mechanism for interministerial cooperation youth affairs. Okay, first there are four steps, which one we have to get identify a clear rules and responsibility for relevant ministries and other government bodies. This have been discussed during our the first point for the authority. Second one is to develop a clear action plans for each level of government, as what been discussed by Prof just now, that how to calculate, how to measure the KPI of the policy. So we have to get a tangible action plans for each level of government. So this one have to be a national, have their own regional and also local, which integrated from one to one another. The third one is to establish that all level of government understand their responsibility to promote ownership. And the last one is to improve engagement and coordination with CSO, youth network, and other partners. Okay, this one one among the among the example. Sorry. Okay. In France, Portugal, and others have created interministerial or interdepartment committees, which are chaired by Prime Minister. Most of the country are chaired by Prime Ministers. In some countries, the ministry with formal responsibility for youth affairs participate in this body, for instance, as chair or by assuming the function of the secretariat. In Australia, they have opted for establishing working groups for specified topics. For example, like national youth strategy, social inclusion, which involve ministries with corresponding portfolios. So each ministry with corresponding portfolio, they have their working groups for specific topic. In Slovenia, each ministry has assigned one focal point for youth affairs in the respective line ministries to act as information accelerators. Moreover, the Council of the Government of the Republic of Slovenia for Youth, gathering youth representative, as what we discussed before, to engage youth representative, and staff from different ministries meets at least twice a year. So they have a meeting at least twice per year to discuss issues regarding youth. For example, in Canada itself, the Prime Minister itself is the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Youth. He also hold the portfolio for youth. The head of government is supported by the Prime Minister Youth Council, which reserves as an advisory body on matters pertaining to Canadian youth. Okay.
So you remember the very early part of the semester, I showed you that video about Iceland.
Yes.
You remember one of the 5 points that made that program that was so successful, and they talk about political will, right? Getting the politicians involved. So here it's the same thing. You know, these countries, they have, they generate tremendous political will for youth issues and youth affairs, right? So that's why they're able to come up with these types of systematic ways of ensuring that there is at least some coordination across the government and implementation of the policy. So that's why, you know, at the top level, you need this kind of political will to really make these things happen. Okay, because without that support from the top, it's really hard to get the policy implemented well and effective. So you can see these are very good examples. Thank you for sharing these, Mahfouz.
Okay, next, a separate budget. As we all know, budget or money is the blood in our vein, the gas in our car. So without budget, we cannot go anywhere. Even though we have a good policy itself, without budget, we cannot go anywhere. That's the reality. So a national youth policy, we need to have a separate budget. So in order to have a good execute youth policy, you have to get a separate budget in order to realize the measure and activities in purpose. Establish a budget allocated for implementation of youth policy, even though youth policy is a cross-sectoral development, as we spoke before, that requires action within several departments, ministry, and agency. It is central that they establish lead agency have a specific budget for youth policy implementation that can be distributed by responsible actors. Failing to this role may lead to a loss of motivation for as when we eager to do something, but if you don't have any budget, we cannot implement it. As for example, for research itself, how can we want to implement any research if we don't have any grant to implement or to do any research upon anything? Following this role, including youth groups involved in designing and drafting the vision of youth policy. So in line with what is already an established practice in many European countries, governments should allocate part of their budget to youth organization through the first one, the grants, administrative grants. Second one, tasks that are not specifically project related. And the third one is state budget for project grants. So they have three that should we give budget upon. So I will share to you wait, okay, this one is one example from Germany, how they allocate their budget for youth. Okay, they have three parts. The first one is the federal level, second one is state level, and the local level. Okay, for the state level, for the federal level, the first one, the main funding mechanism is the child and youth plan for the federation, more like a policy. It is part of the budget administered by the Federal Ministry of Family Affairs, Senior Citizen, Women and Youth. So this one more or less like the ministry itself. Okay, in 2019, BMFSFJ administrated 2.93% of the total federal budget, which amount about 3.5 billion euro. Specific target groups addressed in the child and youth plan are young people with migration, because they are young people who migrate. Their background is not originally from Germany, and also young people with disability impairments. As we discussed about the first one, the target groups, there are variety. So for this Germany, the target groups are for the migration and also for disabilities. So the second part is the state level. For the state level, each German federal state has its own youth plan and assign a portion of funding to several ministerial budgets. They are used to fund measures that are relevant for region and this cannot be funded by the child and youth plan of the federation. For example, we have a federal, in Malaysia also we have the federal one and also the state. State also take control what happens in their states. They have their laws within their states. So example for allocated budgets in the federal states are this one. And the first one is Baden-Württemberg. It's a place, it's a state. Baden-Württemberg, which they allocate annual budget for 2019 for the regional child and youth plan is about 1 billion euro, 1.2 billion euro. Another state is Brandenburg, youth work and the work of youth association, that kind of amount. Education, child and youth, and also other child and youth service. So this one, Brandenburg is more emphasized on education and youth protection. Okay, the third one is the local level. Most of the funding for child and youth service is provided by local authorities. For us, in Malaysia, we call PBT. For example, like Majlis Bandaraya or Dewan Bandaraya, that call. Okay, depending on the procedure, organization are subject to different report system. If they are subject to the direct procedure, they report to the Federal Ministry of for Family Affairs, Senior Citizen, Women and Youth. So everybody, every budget they have implemented, they have to report back to the federal.
Okay, very interesting example. Thank you very much, Mahfouz. So you can see here the different layers of administration of the policy according to budget. So yeah, so a lot of this is it's sort of enshrined in law. It's the law, having the act or the law is what gives an allocation. Without having the legal backing of an actual statute or an actual law, you don't have those budgets. Like Mahfouz said, the blood in our veins, you know, to really make the policy go, to really make it tick, to give it teeth and so forth. You know, you need that budget. So yeah, you can see the commitment there. I mean, that federal level commitment, 3% of the total federal budget, that's huge. 356. If that's right, if the 356 billion pounds, that can't be correct. Is that correct? That's a lot.
I just copy from the EU website.
Oh, okay. I was wondering maybe you added a few zeros there, but yeah, that's a lot. You can see the commitment that they make. You know, it's huge. Okay, great.
Okay, next. Wait. Okay. So the third one is establish link between local, regional, and national level. Okay, this one has been discussed. Before this, we discussed about the budget itself. So now for the implementation of the policy, okay, a national youth policy cannot be a reality without focusing on what needs to be done at the local and regional level and with the active involvement of the local government authorities, because the local itself understand the true problem, the true issues that occur among the youth in their place. It should recognize the competency and responsibility of local and regional authorities and propose ways and means to implement policy in cooperation, coordination, and partnership with them. Because the ministry itself is the policy maker. However, the implementer is the local authority itself. It's not that's why some of the ministry or some of the policy cannot be implemented, because whatever that we implement by the local authorities is some of the policies cannot be implemented because maybe there are gaps between the instruction of the policy itself, between the policy maker by the ministry and also the local authorities. So the degree of local self-autonomy for municipalities differs from country to country. Of course, a youth policy should be designed that provide a stimulus, guidance, example of best practice and financial, as well as other incentive for local authorities. Government authorities at the local level should get a boost of motivation to address youth issues and develop local youth action plans as a result of the youth effort at the national level.
So this is why policies cannot be really, to be effective, they cannot be too top down, you know. You need local participation in policy development because you need local buy-in to make the policies go, right? They're not gonna take effect. They're not gonna be effective. They're not gonna be relevant unless there is input and participation at the local level, right? And so I think this tends to happen a lot in Malaysia. We have a lot of policies that are very much top down. They're created by people in Putrajaya and they're just sort of given to the local municipalities to be implemented, and you don't get a strong sense of buy-in from people on the ground, right? And those are the kind of policies that are rarely very effective. You know, if they are put in practice, it's usually, you know, sort of just to do the bare minimum, right? They're not really embraced by the people at the local level, right? As opposed to having people that are involved in the process from the beginning, so their needs are really accounted for in the policy. All right, so it's really important to have those strong linkages.
Right.
Okay.
So this one example I take from Czech Republic.
Oh.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, in Czech Republic, they have two, regional public authorities and also local public authorities. Okay, for regional public authorities, the territory of the Czech Republic is divided into regions. This one for your information, there are about 14 regions and they have possesses two jurisdiction. One is independence or self-governing, another one is delegated or state administration. Public administration is provided by regional authority. The bodies coordinating the delegated activities of the regional authorities are the respective ministries. Each region has to set up a regional committee for education, youth, and sport. So every region, the 14 region, has to set up a committee which targeted education, youth, and sport. Okay, for local public authorities, municipalities have both their own independent jurisdiction, also same, self-governing and delegated jurisdiction, state administration. Public administration is issued mainly by the municipal authorities. Municipal authorities can issue their own decrees, so they have all their own power also. There are several platforms of municipalities to support the negotiation, policy implementation. Okay, suddenly sharing a good practice. Healthy cities, they have to share their Healthy Cities Union of Town and Municipality of the Czech Republic and also Association of the Local Governments.
Okay, all right, so you can see an example of how the power is sort of divided or broken down in Czech Republic. Okay, interesting.
Okay, next is in line with international practice. Okay, if we refer to our article, the point is in line with international, so Euro practice. But I just want to make it more general. That's why I put in line with international practice.
Okay.
Because I related. I will explain it later. The national authorities should also consider the extent to which their own youth policy development might be aligned to these international standards. At the international level, a number of documents relating to youth policy have been developed or adopted by organizations within the United Nations system as well, suggesting that there is also an international standard of what should be considered a national youth policy. Youth policy is developing different programs support improvement and exchange of practice among countries. Okay, for example here the EU youth strategy. In Europe they have the EU youth strategy is international strategy which implement on 2019 until 2027, which focus on youth participation in democratic life, promotes voluntary engagement, learning mobility, solidarity, and intercultural learning, and support youth empowerment through quality, innovation, and recognition of youth work. So another one is the youth strategy is also includes mutual learning activities among member states, sharing of information from the national level, the youth dialogue and other forms of participation of young people in policy making, the youth strategy platform and evidence-based tool. So what the benefit with into this one is first one, those countries who don't have a solid national policy, they can use or they can maybe so-called like copy from other country. Another one is when you have a for example, there's youth strategy, so every country can follow. So the region itself will become a good practice in terms of their policy decision.
All right. So there's a lot of I mean, the EU is it's integrated in that sense. They learn from each other, and they create sort of meta policies, bigger, sort of bigger policies that cut across, so that they can engage in these types of feedback sharing, right, of best practices, of best practices in policy making. Okay, so it's interesting to see how they do it. But the focus is, as you can see there, is really on youth participation, youth engagement, and youth work and empowerment. And you'll find, I think you'll find most youth policies nowadays, this is the emphasis on, again, streamlining young people into the adult world, really, and giving them space and giving them a platform where they can give voice to policymaking and empowerment and so forth. All right. So this is where we're at, and this is where a lot of youth policy is headed now. So is that it, Mahfouz, or you have more?
Just last one is conclusion. Just okay, this one.
Great.
So in summary, they have 11 points that have been explained or been highlighted by the writer itself. The first one is a clearly defined government authority of youth. The second one is a clear defined target group and a concrete transparent strategy. Next, a knowledge-based policy. And then young people as a resource, not a problem. Then promoting youth participation, a cross-sectoral integrated approach to youth policy, inter-ministerial cooperation, a separate budget, established link between local, regional, and national level, and in line with international practice. So if you want to develop a solid policy in terms of youth policy, so you have to include all these things in order to execute them. That's all.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm not to correct you. I would agree with you. Not to say that you have to have all these to have a good youth policy. These are just a sort of set of good practices, right? So in some cases, they may not be achievable for some countries, at least totally achievable. Like the extent to which you are in line with international practices might vary. The ability to link between local, regional, and national levels will definitely vary according to countries, right? But these are sort of what we would call best practices. So, as many as are integrated and included in youth policy, the better off the policy is going to be. Okay, so it works as a sort of guideline. Okay, so thank you very much, Mahfouz and group, Xiaoyan and Peng. So thank you very much Very nice presentation. I really appreciate the add-ins, the additional examples that you gave. I think that really enriched the presentation. So that was very useful. Okay, so now what I would like to do is I'd like to sort of shift gears, and now let's look at what we've learned from the policy best practices article and presentation, and see how much we can apply that to our own local Malaysian youth policy. All right. And so as I mentioned when we started the class, on Putra Blast, I have a set of questions there that we can use to begin to critique our own youth policy, the Malaysian youth policy. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually send you guys off into your breakout rooms. I'm going to put you in small groups, just groups of 3 people each. And in those groups, what I would like you to do is take a few minutes to go through the policy. All right. And it's not very long. It's not even, I mean, you can go through it very quickly, actually. And then from those questions that I've asked, I would just recommend that you break up those questions according to the members in the group. So give each member in the group 3 or 4 questions to handle, and then try to come up and answer those questions. They're not very long. They're just sort of short answered questions. You can just answer them very quickly once you've gone through the policy. And I want to get your feedback and have you begin to look at our policy, look at its strengths, its weaknesses, what is included in it, what is not included, what's missing based on what we just heard, okay? And try to give an overall assessment of the policy from that sort of best practice perspective, okay? So the link, the policy can be downloaded from Putra Blast, so you can do that yourselves. And then the link there to upload your questions is also there. Okay, so we should have plenty of time to do this. So let me go, and I'm gonna go ahead and break you guys into groups now. So we got 25 participants, so I'll put you in. Let's do 8 groups. Okay. So if you have any questions, just let me know. You can send me a message from your breakout room. And then once you're done answering the questions, just come back to the main room. Okay? All right, here we go.
Oh, I think it's still not yet.
Okay, we're back to the group.
Yeah, we're back to the class.
It's okay. You can just sign out directly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think to actually leave, you have to come back into the main room first, and then you can.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
need to actually click by ourselves to leave the
Yeah.
room.
Okay.
If not, everyone will just stay inside the room.
Forever.
Yeah, whatever.
I'll send everyone a message.
Yeah, because like we are totally engrossed doing the answers.
Oh, okay.
So we are not
Did you
even
get my
aware.
messages? Did you get my messages?
No. I was looking at the time and almost 9.
Oh.
So I thought, oh my God, is it only us that have not come back to the main session?
Oh, I see.
And then, yeah.
Okay. Then I'll just.
Yeah. Only our group is here.
Okay. Well, yeah. You can just sign off. We'll continue with the reporting out at the next class.
Yeah, sure. That's okay too.
Okay.
So,
you're done. We can go. You can go.
okay, thank you,
Okay.
Doctor.
Thank
Okay.
you, Prof.
Okay.
Thank you,
Inshallah, see you in
Prof.
2 weeks.
Bye.
Okay.
All right, thank you so
Assalamualaikum.
much. Waalaikumsalam.
Okay, bye.
Sorry,
Hi,
Doc.
Hi, you're free to go. I don't know, maybe you didn't see my message in the group, but I said once you've uploaded your answer, you're free to leave. You can go.
Oh, okay, Doctor.
I will see you in 2 weeks. Okay?
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, sure. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, I guess you guys didn't see my message in the room. I sent several messages saying that once you've uploaded your answers, you're free to leave. You can go. You didn't have to come back here.
We read, Prof, but we haven't finished with the question.
Oh, okay. Never
Yeah,
mind.
we only have one question left.
Oh, it's okay. You can do it on your own. You can just after the class, anytime. Anytime
Okay.
before the next class, you can finish. Just upload it straight away. All right?
Okay.
Okay. So thanks, everyone. Inshallah, have a good break and see you in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you, Prof.
Okay.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. Take care.
Evening, Doc.
Waalaikumsalam. Bye-bye.